All right, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephanie Wells here at MEFA. I'm Director of College Relations and work with lots of colleges, such as our friends that are on the panel today. And we're here to talk about financial aid appeals. And we have three experts. I'm going to let them introduce themselves in just a minute, that are going to answer all your questions. We have a bunch of canned questions that we're going to go through, questions that we know families usually ask. So we're going to have a really great webinar for you this afternoon. Before we get started, I just want to go over some logistics. So you can use the live transcript feature. If you have questions, please type those in the Q&A. The chat is disabled. So please, go ahead and do that. And again, we are recording today's webinar, so we'll share that with everyone. So with that, I'm going to just talk about MEFA a little bit, and then we'll introduce our panel. So MEFA is a quasi-state authority here in Massachusetts. Many of you are probably on our email list and getting all our great emails from us, but we're actually created to offer a loan program almost 45 years ago. And since then, we've gone on to create college savings programs and lots of guidance and education for families, school counselors, and college administrators. So this is one in many series of webinars we have for families. And just looking at the registration list, we see we have mostly high school seniors or parents of high school seniors on the line. So we know that this is really timely information for you. So I am going to stop sharing the screen and turn it over to our panelists. We'll start with you, Maria, and have you all introduce yourself. Just tell us a little bit about your school and where you're from.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maria Morelli. I'm the Director of Financial Aid at Endicott College. Endicott College is a small college. We have 3,500 undergraduates, traditional undergraduates, about 1,200 graduate students, and we are located up in Beverly, Massachusetts. We have a beautiful seaside campus. We encourage you to come look at it because you'll probably fall in love with the campus if you
You
come.
will fall in love with the campus. Great, Rob.
Hi, folks. I'm Rob Lecanto. I'm the Assistant Vice President of Financial Aid here at Curry College. Curry is located in Milton, Massachusetts, just south of Boston. We're a small private college also, about 1,800 traditional students, probably about another 400 continuing ed and graduate students.
Great. And Sue.
I'm Sue Lanzillo, the Associate Director of Financial Aid at Framingham State University. We are small public, just west of Boston. We also have a pretty campus. I don't think we can compete with Endicott, but as far as state colleges go, it's very, very pretty up on a hill. Our enrollment is about 3,000 undergrads and about 1,100 grads.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. So for those who are just joining us, just want to let you know that we are recording today's webinar. So we're going to jump right in. We don't have slides. It's really going to be more of a panel discussion. So first, I'll just talk about what it is a financial aid appeal, just to set the stage. So a financial aid appeal is when you, as a family, students, you get your financial aid offer from a college and you need more money. Whatever the reason is, we're going to go through all those reasons and how schools, look at those appeals. But it's really you're asking for an appeal of the initial financial aid offer. And we will talk about timing, when to do that, all of that good stuff. Now, appeals can come in two different formats, just like financial aid can be in two different formats. We have merit-based aid and need-based aid. So your appeal might be based on your merit scholarship, and that's might be through the admissions office. And a lot of the appeals, specifically, we're going to focus in on in detail today, would be financial need-based or appeals based on financial need through the financial aid process. So not based on the student's merit, academic talents, or skills, but more on your financial information that's based on your financial aid forms that you filled out. So that's a little bit about appeals in general, just to kind of set the stage. And I'm going to have Rob kick us off just to talk about, and I know some of the families here have gotten different financial aid offers already. Why do financial aid offers differ so much from school to school? Like, what are some of the reasons for that? I'll have Rob start us off.
Sure. Thanks, Stephanie. So one of the reasons offers can differ is depending on the type of school. A private college financial aid offer might be different than say a state college because the cost of attendance is different. So what is a cost of attendance? So a cost of attendance basically is what a school has to come up for each student is a cost of attendance to basically determine what it would cost that student to attend that school for the entire academic year. So the cost of attendance is kind of comprised of what we call direct and indirect costs. Direct costs meaning what the school is billing you for, like tuition, room and board, fees, and then indirect costs are things or costs that we're not billing you for, but those are costs you're going to incur, like personal expenses and transportation. So obviously, a private college like Curry is going to have a higher cost of attendance than, let's say, a cost of attendance at Framingham State. So those types of one of the things right off the bat is the cost of attendance can change the amount of grant assistance that you might receive. Also, it can depend on what a school's enrollment goals are, what type of student the school is looking for, the high school, maybe the high school grade point average or the students' high school credentials, how they perform through the admissions process may have some bearing on the need-based side. Also, different schools can require different information from you. So to give you an example, here at Curry, we only require you to do the FAFSA in determining any eligibility for need-based aid, but highly selective private schools may require you to do a profile form. So if some of you are applying to schools, let's say like Boston College, they may require a profile form where they're going to take a much deeper dive on a student's finances or a family's finances and determining what a family can contribute toward education. And that can change the amount of grant, need-based grant assistance that you can receive. So those are some of the factors that can why need-based aid and why aid offers can differ from school to school on the need-based side.
Great, thanks, Rob.
Yep.
Sue, let me toss it over to you just to briefly talk about from a state school, lower costs, but typically at state schools they lower costs, but also might have not have as much merit. As big, huge billion-dollar endowments like a highly selective school. And most families aren't going to the highly selective schools. They're going to state schools and other schools across the country. In Massachusetts, we have so many great schools. So can you just talk about it from a state school perspective, how that might work?
Yep. And so tuition and fees at Framingham for this year was $12,220. So you're right. We're not going to give out $20,000 merit scholarships when our tuition and fees is only $12,000. So, we encourage families when they're looking at, when they're comparing one package to another, to look at direct costs minus grants. Because costs can vary significantly. So you may get a smaller grant here, but the bottom line may still end up being less. Another thing to add on to why packages may differ is the funding that each school receives. So some schools may have larger endowments. Also, as a state school, we're going to get different amounts of money from the state of Massachusetts than private schools. They're going to get some from the state as well, but not as much as we do. So we get a lot of funding from the state, and that can vary significantly from year to year. And usually we're not notified until late. So sometimes we don't even know how much we're going to get. But the last couple of years has been very, very high. And like at Framingham, we actually are able to provide a guarantee to students that their tuition fees will be covered if their income is $85,000 or less. So that's one of the things that like a public institution is different maybe than the privates.
That's great. Maria, can you talk a little bit about this as well, how offers can differ from school to school? And it also how deadlines, I don't know, Endicott, if meeting that deadline is, really strict. Some schools might be, have different policies there, but and just some advice too about, families. Is it okay to call about this and ask
Yes.
questions?
Yeah, I mean, definitely if you have any questions, we want you to call. Like, we want you to ask the question. I know sometimes families might feel like, oh, well, they might feel like we're bothering them or, but like we'd rather you ask than not ask because we want to be able to answer those questions. So definitely if you're unsure of whether you can appeal or you should appeal, then definitely ask. Each school is going to have their own policy about the process. So definitely you would want to reach out if you have any questions. And yeah, I mean, priority deadlines, you definitely want to meet priority deadlines. They're really important. How you're going to hear it depends a lot today. So just this is our favorite phrase in financial aid, just because each student is different, each school is different, each school has different goals and realities. So it is going to depend highly on what school you're working with. But um, most it, it, it is always good practice to meet those deadlines because a lot of times those deadlines are there because you have certain funds that are pots of money. And once those pots are spent, there's no more. And so sometimes there has to be some way to distinguish, okay, who gets priority for that funding. And the deadlines are, one of the ways that we do that. So you want to make sure if there are any published deadlines that you're meeting with them. If you have any questions, obviously ask about it. And yeah, I think, a big thing, the others already touched on enrollment goals, schools, especially if for on-ground classes, online are a little bit different, but for online classes, there's only so much room at the school. There's only so many dorm rooms. There's only so many seats that can sit in a classroom. And therefore, once certain majors may fill up faster, may deposit faster than other majors. And at that point, it that's going to make a difference in how student colleges award. Maybe they get a lot of applications for one type of major and not for another, and that's going to impact their strategy and how they do those awards because they're trying to make their class and have it look and have the right number of students.
That's great. So kind of touching upon that, I'm going to have you start off on this one, Rob. I get this question all the time from families. Can I negotiate my financial aid offer? And my answer is typically, I'll just tell you what I tell families, and you can talk about how it works at the college. My answer is typically, financial aid offices are trying to put their best offer up front. They're not holding back. They really want to give you what they can. But with that said, if it's not enough, then you should definitely, talk to the school. So can you just talk about like the difference between negotiating merit aid or need-based aid and a true financial aid appeal?
Sure, sure. So merit aid is usually determined from the admissions office. So we get two separate offices going here. So any type of merit aid, like here at Curry, every student who applies receives some type of merit aid from the institution. And that comes from the admissions office based on the student's admissions application. Anything that's need-based, grant assistance from the college, comes basically off the FAFSA application. So if you have questions regarding the merit side of the house, usually that would go to the admissions office. And, they can explain to you why the student received the type of merit aid that they did. Sometimes here at Curry, a family will engage with admissions, and sometimes admissions will make a change to a merit award. So it's always good to kind of know what the range of merit awards are, what the low end is, what the high end is, so you know exactly where you fall. Because obviously, if your student is at the high end, there's probably nowhere else to go on that side. There's really, I mean, there's really not a lot of negotiating on the need-based side, only because that information is coming from the FAFSA, so it's coming decisions based on your income. And that's assuming that income has stayed the same. But one of the things I'll point out is that remember, when you filled out the FAFSA, they're looking at income from 2024. That was 2 years ago. Something could have changed in 2025 or even 2026. So it's really important to engage the school if that is the case on an appeal. So if you're looking at saying, well, geez, I wonder if that need-based grant could change. Maybe the answer is yes, if your financial situation has changed. We've had times where 2024 looked great, but the parent lost their income in the beginning part of 2025, or maybe something just happened right now in the beginning of this year. So it's important that you reach out to the schools and let them know, because all we can do is go by what the FAFSA tells us. But obviously, if you're reaching out and saying, hey, listen, I lost my job, my spouse lost their job, we had a significant change of income from 24 to 25, or we anticipate 26 being different. Schools can work with you on that. And there's a whole process that that we have here, and it's probably very similar to other schools. So reach out, find out what that process is, find out any forms that you need to fill out, any documentation you need to provide, because usually there is documentation that we need, maybe a copy of a tax return from the following year, or some type of letter showing that you did lose your job, and things like that. So changes happen, life happens. So you just want to make sure that you're reaching out to the schools to let them know if that's the case. Hopefully it's not the case. But if it is, obviously let us know and we can work with you on that.
Great. And I do want to talk about the process because we have a question about that. But Sue, anything to add about, when families say they want to negotiate, particularly, whether it's merit or need based, anything different?
So basically the same. Merit goes to admissions. I don't think they usually negotiate. They kind of have a strict formula to calculate what they give and how much they give. And financial aid, unless there are changes to the situation, we don't make adjustments either. However, we do have one exception to that, and that is we have a program here where if a family got a different package, a better package from a sister state school, not the universities, but like Salem State or Westfield State, we will match the grant amount of that. So some schools will take, a look at other schools' packages. We don't unless it's a sister school, but
That's good to know. Yep. And how about you, Maria? Anything different at Endicott that you want to add?
Yeah, so we do very similar. Merit is decided by admissions. We have a committee that involves admissions and financial aid for appeals that kind of goes through and looks at what people what families submit. But admissions mostly handles the merit appeals. We don't, and I feel like most schools, I may be making a generalization, would say that they don't match per se, but we will ask to see the other financial aid offers if they have them, and especially if it's need based, we want to see all of the, like, not just the merit offer, but the financial aid offer as well. Not to match, but just to get an idea of what ballpark we're in compared to the other schools and to see if we can at least get closer. For our school, if somebody comes in with an award like from Framingham State, we're never going to match a state school, but other private schools that are kind of in the same range as us, we will look at those. But I wouldn't say it's a negotiation so much, but we definitely want to hear out, especially if there's a change in circumstances, like if the FAFSA is not really reflecting. And there is, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next question, but there is also a federal process for change of circumstances, which may actually change the federal aid as well. So we definitely want to know about that if there's changes from whatever was reflected on the FAFSA.
Great. Yeah, we'll talk about the process in a sec, but it never hurts to ask, or even I like to tell families, even if it's just so you understand your financial aid offer better, if you have questions about it.
Yeah. We're
So,
never
so
rescinding the offer, so you asking for more is not going to change what we've already offered. Some people get afraid about that, well, if I ask for more, if I say that I can't, maybe they'll change my offer, but we're never going to change your initial offer, so you can't lose by asking.
that's a good question. I get that a lot from families too, who are worried that if they are asking for more aid or inquiring about aid, that it might be held against the student on the admission side, and that's just not the case. Like you guys, you want to help the families. All right, this is great. Let's talk a little bit about some of the reasons. And since we're chatting with you, Maria, I'll have you kick this one off. What are some of the reasons that families appeal based on special circumstances?
Right. So if you hear us say special circumstances, that's a term that the federal government has actually kind of made a specific term, meaning that the student had a change in their financial circumstances from what they filed on the FAFSA. And we do have a process where we can go in and edit the information on the FAFSA based on documentation that the family provides to get a new anybody who's applied for financial aid, the SAI, the student aid index, we could potentially, that could come down depending on what the income changes. So a big, huge one, which Rob already mentioned, is loss of employment. So a parent loses a job, is now on unemployment, or just not receiving anything. That's going to be a huge change. Any, unfortunate death in the family is another one that, that happened recently. High medical expenses are a big one. And I think it's usually for medical expenses not covered by insurance, is what people will submit, and that can potentially be taken out of the income, to lower the income that we're using to look at need. Some schools will look at private school tuition that families are paying maybe for younger siblings in the family. Um, let's see. Loss of workman's comp or any other kind of benefits like that. Childcare for independent students. A student so most 18 to 24-year-olds are going to be dependent, which means their parents are on the FAFSA. But for independent students, like graduate students would be independent students. There's some older students, childcare. If a student has to put their child into any kind of childcare in order to attend school, that can potentially be used in a special circumstances. And then also like additional purchases or expenses can be taken, like a laptop purchase, or maybe if a student is in a program where they have to buy special equipment or special software, that can be added into the student's budget to change what they're eligible for.
That's great. You mentioned independent students, so I'm going to toss this one over to you, Sue. Um, so the change in, I have some students who or families who will say, well, I'll just, the student will be emancipated, so they'll be independent, or, they're not on my insurance, or we're not claiming them on taxes anymore, so they're independent. And there is, a strict federal guidelines on, what makes a student independent. And sometimes students are in a situation where they can't provide the parent information. So they need to speak with you about that. Can you just talk a little bit about, students who, might be in a situation where they can't get parent information, and what guidelines can make a student actually independent, particularly for undergrad students?
We're pretty strict on that. We have a lot of people that initially reach out about that, and then they end up getting their parents' information when they find out, what it is that we're looking for. Unfortunately, a lot of teenagers or students at this age, may have disagreements with their family, and they don't want their parents to be involved, or the parents don't want to be involved because they're not seeing eye to eye about something. We won't do an override for that kind of thing. If the parent can fill out the form and there's no reason why they can't fill out the form, then we require them to do that, even if they're not speaking at the time. So documentation that we would need in order to do an override is basically that it is truly not in the best interest of the student to contact the parent, and we would want documentation of that. So police reports showing, maybe there's a parent is in a drug rehabilitation center, or there's incarceration issues or abuse issues. Definitely significant documentation would need to be provided, I guess.
Yeah.
We always have one-on-one discussions with the students. It's a give and take. We don't send a letter outlining what's needed. We talk to them so that we can get additional feedback, because there are occasions when we don't think they qualify, and then the more they talk, we realize, oh, okay, that this is an issue that we were not aware of. So we definitely have one-on-one conversations with students about these situations, but we don't do overrides just because the parents are choosing not to provide the information.
Yep.
There is one spot on the FAFSA where a student can indicate that the parents do not want to provide the information, and then they're eligible for an unsubsidized Stafford loan only. And, we do those as well. There's also that question about homelessness. We get a lot of those where people check off that they're at risk of homelessness.
Mhm.
And so we'll require documentation of that too, because sometimes they just, well, I don't really know where I'm going to be living, or, so we won't do it for that. So,
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I know school counselors can sometimes be helpful with
yes.
students who are in those difficult situations where they truly, don't have a parent to help them with that. So,
Yeah.
and they can help with that documentation. So that's good to know. Great. Rob, anything to add here? Situations that you frequently come across that would be helpful.
I mean, I just want to add that most of the appeals that we receive, financial aid appeals, are usually not based on significant changes to a family's income. It's really more of a, hey, is there any more grant assistance? Johnny really wants to attend Curry. Maybe talk about a little bit about Johnny's accomplishments in high school, if they're an athlete or they're involved in different activities and clubs and things like that. And they're just basically talking about how it's a stretch. And maybe they're going to talk about another child that's going to be coming up in a year or two, or maybe they're helping another student pay back loans that might be older, they graduated. So the majority of appeals that we get, I mean, we kind of call them, what we call them is soft appeals. So they're not really based on a specific reason. It's not saying that my parent lost a job or God forbid there was a death of a parent. It's just more of, hey, is there any more grant assistance? And we do have a committee that reviews those. And we always try to level set with the family what the expectations are. So if I'm meeting with a family and they want to appeal and they go forward, I always let them know kind of what the range of that award is. That award is that appeal may be granted. However, it's going to be a more smaller amount of a grant assistance award where a significant change to family situations could result in a lot more additionally, not only from the college, but it could also make the student eligible for maybe some federal funds or state funds that they weren't initially eligible for. I never dissuade anybody from appealing. I think Stephanie was kind of alluding to the fact that I think what's the worst somebody's going to say? No. It could be denied, but if it is granted, we try to level set what that expectation is. But obviously, we really want to move much quicker on what we would call a hard appeal, which is based on a significant change, because that family doesn't know what they can afford or not based on their situation. So any money that they can get in addition in aid is going to assist them. So those are kind of the priority, but we do review the softer appeals of just, is there any more grant assistance? And we do grant some of those, but they tend to be a smaller amount. Now that's how it's done at Curry. I can't speak for other institutions of how they handle that, but that's kind of the process here. So there are kind of different routes to go for appealing. It doesn't just have to be significant changes to your financial situation. It can be a general appeal just for more assistance. At Curry, if you do get that award is continued on for subsequent years. So you would get it sophomore, junior, and senior year too.
Great, great.
Yep.
That's great. This is all super helpful. So we do have a question in the chat, which leads to the next question. So the question in the chat is, should we call to appeal or write an appeal letter? So I'm going to send that one over to you, Maria, if you want to just talk about, what is the process at Endicott for making appeal? Where should they start? And that might be different from school to school.
Yeah, and so obviously it's going to be different from school to school. So as a general advice, I would say if you're not sure what the process is, then I would just give a call or shoot an email to ask what is the process to appeal. You are not going to be the only person asking that question. They're going to have canned information for you. So like at Endicott, we have an appeal form that we use that kind of asks some questions and kind of tries to draw out some information. One of those is whether there's a special circumstance, because we would put you through that process first before doing what kind of Rob called a soft appeal, which we also do those. And so the form kind of helps us figure out whether you have a special circumstance or not. But every school is going to have a different process for that. Probably they're going to want you to write something because it's going to go through a process where it's reviewed by either, admissions council or a committee or something like that, and they probably will need something in writing. So I would just call and ask them what the process is. And yeah, at Endicott, we use a form. If you shoot us an email and you write your whole appeal in the email, we won't make you also do the form. We'll just manually put it into the form for you, so you don't have to do it again. But sometimes it's easier if you just have that form for schools that have something similar. Yeah, and I would say, for me, I know somebody else also asked about whether the parent should write it or the student, and what would be preferable. And I mean, for an Endicott, I obviously can't speak for every school. Endicott, it would not make a difference whether I think whoever can best express what the issue is should be the person that writes it. So if the parents have a better handle on, some financial issues and they can write it out better than the student, then I think, for sure the parent should write it. I think it's really helpful if you can be, at least in my opinion, you can be specific kind of about either what your issue is or what you need. I think most schools, especially with a soft appeal where it's not coming from a special circumstance, you know, most of them are not going to be, they may be $2,000, $3,000 additional. If your gap is something like 10 or 15,000, that's probably not going to be made up with, especially a general appeal. It could in a special circumstances. If you have a change in employment, that could change that much, but with just a soft appeal, where there isn't really a change in circumstances, um, it's helpful to be specific. Like if you need, if $4,000 will make the difference, then yeah, I think put it in there and say, that this is what we need to get to be able to say yes. I think that's helpful for the school to know what you're looking for and what your expectations are. Um, yeah, that's where I would go with it.
Yeah, and thank you for answering that question in the chat because I was going to throw it to one of you, where the question was, should the student call or should the parent call? And it really is who has the information, and usually it's the parent for an undergraduate. So Sue, let me ask you a quick question about the process. When do you want to hear from them? Is it after they've been accepted, until they get a financial aid offer? I know we have a little note in our notes about not waiting till after you've deposited to appeal. You really want to try and make
Yeah.
that decision, but talk about the timeline about, when.
Um, I don't think it matters that much if it's before or after the award. I guess my preference would be after they've already received their award, so they know whether they're happy or not. But if it's a significant financial change, and they're going to be anxious to get the right package up front, then I certainly understand them submitting it sooner, as long as they're doing it after their FAFSA has been submitted. Sometimes we get appeals and they haven't filed a FAFSA yet, so we don't even have a file for them. We don't do soft appeals at least for incoming students. If there is no change to their financial circumstances, then we don't do anything with the appeal. If it is a change in financial circumstances, we always require writing and documentation. However, sometimes I do like to talk to the families because, as Rob said, like to manage their expectations. So with our cost of attendance being significantly lower than a lot of privates, there's less wiggle room. So I will tell them maybe right up front, like our cost of attendance is, 30, what is it? It's 32,400 this year. If their student aid index that the FAFSA provides them, if that's not less than the cost of attendance, they're not eligible for any need-based aid. So if they're reaching out to me and their SAI is already, 85,000 or something, and there's a change and I say, well, okay, well, that SAI may go from 85 to 50 or even 40, but unless you get under 30, you're not going to be eligible for any grant-based aid. And that way, I only do that so that I'm not wasting all their time gathering all these documents, writing these letters, sending it only for me to say you're still not eligible. So that's kind of the process here.
Yeah, great. Can you elaborate a little bit about that, about just, what the timing is there anything different with Curry? And just, kind of the amounts and setting expectations. And we did have a question that I kind of answered already, but they specifically asked about private universities. Should you do it before or after you deposit?
Right. Right. So, I mean, for a lot of families, they may not be able to deposit until they kind of know what the bottom line is going to be. So, how that outcome of that appeal is really important. So, I would agree with Susan. There's only no no preference on when they send it, but I think for most families, they want to know sooner than later so they can kind of make that decision. Okay, Curry granted us an appeal of X dollars, and this school may have granted an appeal because I'm sure that if they're, they potentially could be sending that appeal letter out to multiple schools that they're looking at. So that probably is a factor in their final decision on where they're going to deposit. So the timing isn't, it doesn't really matter with the timing. But the expectations, I think, are really, really important. And we don't always get to have that conversation. That's something that if a family happens to be in and we have an in-person appointment or a phone call or virtual, we can talk about that. And I always make sure I do that, especially for the ones that are the soft appeals. Because sometimes in the letter, I'm thinking of a letter that just came in the other day where they basically were asking for an additional $12,000. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, your appeal might be granted, but I know you're not going to get an additional $12,000. And if that's truly what they need, it's best to know what the school can do to support that as quick as possible, because you may want to pivot at that point. And you might say, okay, this school financially is not going to work for me, and I've got to look at something else. And the sooner you can make that decision, the better, because it never fails. We always have a couple of families that kind of don't look at the process, and they're coming in August, and then they're realizing the bill is X amount of dollars, and really they have no resources to pay that bill. So we want to get to that family early because, we obviously want to enroll students, but I think every institution, we're very ethical people, and we want to make sure that we're not, putting a financial burden on a family that can't support that. That's not fair to them. And this is the one time in the process where families get to be proactive. You can make those decisions based on what those aid packages are telling you. If you go through 4 years of just borrowing loans, you're just reacting to loan payments 4 years down the road. So you really want to make sure you understand exactly what the financial responsibility is. And so, getting that appeal, knowing what the schools can or cannot do for you sooner than later, because every school is pretty much going to ask you to make that decision by May 1st for the most part. So we're already at the beginning of March. So quickly, May 1st is coming pretty quick. The quicker you can get those results, the quicker you can make that, educated decision and what's best for you.
That's great. I'll kind of have you elaborate a little bit, Maria, about future needs. So appeals for future needs. So I know that I'm going to lose my job in 6 months. I'm getting laid off in 6 months. How do you handle the future? Because we know something's coming down the road, but
Yeah.
how does that work?
Um, yeah, so those are always tough, especially if it's a I might lose my job in a few months. And if it's I would say most schools, if it's a I might, then we'd probably have to wait and see what happens with that. If somebody has just lost their job or they know like let's say they know they're being laid off in a couple of months, the we do have the mechanism in terms of the special circumstances process where we could take that into consideration. It gets more complicated the further in the future it is because you're trying to project out and you could be losing a job in 2 months and then have another job in 2.5 months and things are going to change. So I think in that case a lot of schools may ask you to wait and see, and then so if it's a special circumstances where we're adjusting the FAFSA, that can happen anytime during the aid year. So even after you deposit, you're matriculated, if something changes, you can go to your financial aid office and talk to them about that, and we could potentially make an adjustment based on that. So, but it is hard when making a decision because you're just going to whatever school you're going to be up in the air about that if you're not sure what your situation is. But I think it's worth, if you have something that is coming in the future, to definitely talk to the school about it and let them know what that situation is. And I think just somebody had asked a question about, basically on paper, they look like they have more than they do, and they may be taking care of elderly parents and stuff like that. And I just want to say, as like financial aid people, like we understand that the FAFSA does not necessarily give like a perfect picture of exactly what your true financial situation is. It's just a tool that we use. And obviously we have to use it for the federal purposes because that's the tool for federal purposes. But we understand that there are things that are not going to show necessarily on that FAFSA, but are hardships for the family. And I think if you have something going on, um, I don't like your boiler just blew, or you just had to put a new roof on the house. Like, things like that. Those are very expensive, but that's not going to show up on the FAFSA, but they could make a difference in your family's financial aid situation. I would, feel free to reach out to us and talk to us about that. And, to Susan's point, sometimes even what seems like a very significant change, especially when it comes to changing the FAFSA, still may not change eligibility because it really it's a formula. But we can always look at it and at least consider it.
Yeah, and this could happen the senior year of college, something drastic could change. So it's not, we're kind of focusing on high school seniors right now and making that decision for May 1, but th life happens right throughout. Rob and Sue, anything different to add to this one about, future issues that might come up or?
No, I would just echo what Maria said. I think she answered it great. That's pretty much how we would look at it here too. It's kind of, it's tough in the future, as you said, I might get laid off. Well, then you might not get laid off, so it kind of, the door can swing both ways. But we're here, obviously, and I think that's important. I think Maria raised a really, really good point. Is that once school started, that's not like a deadline for appeals. Something could happen in the second semester, in the spring semester, or sometime during the fall. So, we can react to that and we can make changes to the FAFSA, as Maria said, anytime during the academic year, if something was to change. So it's just important that you let us know because obviously, unless you reach out to us, we have no way to know that something has transpired in your life that's going to impact your ability to pay for college.
Great, thank
Yeah,
you.
and I'll add that, so we're in the 25-26 year currently. So their students are in their, halfway through their spring semester, and I'm still getting appeals for this year. And that FAFSA was based on 23 income. And I will I will substitute 24 tax returns if they have them, or 25 tax returns if they have them for this year still. And that will go back. And for us, we will look at fall semester that's already passed, as well as spring semester with this updated information. So I'm still getting appeals for this current year. But as far as future, even when they do lose a job, if they just lost their job yesterday, we won't estimate income until at least 10 weeks is out. Because most likely they're getting unemployment, or there's just too many unknowns. They may get a job that pays them twice as much. So we don't do it until at least 10 weeks is out. And the last thing I want to say about that is, sometimes families just, and maybe we're going to get to this at the end, but I just didn't want to forget to say it. Sometimes families are just confused about the process and, comparing one package to another, or will an appeal help me, or I got denied, my FAFSA says I'm only eligible for this, and I don't feel like that's right. If they just have questions, we're happy to talk to them to explain it. And then it may not give them the answer that they want, but hopefully they'll at least understand. And, it's potentially they could have made a mistake on the FAFSA. So I just want to say that we're happy to explain things to them if they're confused about anything along the way.
Right, right. And I always recommend, when I'm talking to families, the financial aid folks that we work with, they're there to help. Like they want to be able to get you as much as you're eligible for. They're not, their job isn't to hold back funds. It's to, try and get you the funds that you're working, that you need, to the best of their ability with budgets and things
Yeah.
like that. So,
Yeah, I was just
Sue, go ahead, Maria, go ahead.
I was just saying an example, like Sue mentioned, like that you could have a mistake on the FAFSA, like a big one that we see all the time, and we try to reach out to people if we catch it and see it, like is a family that did a rollover in a year, and that will show up as income on your taxes. And if you forget, there is a question where it asks if it was a rollover. If you don't answer that as yes, it will count against your income, or it'll count as part of your income. Whereas if you indicate that it's a rollover, it will. So so we see families all the time that the taxes will come in and it will put that that rollover funding as income, and then the family forgets to put that was a rollover, and it will look like their income is a lot higher. And so like even just asking a question, you could find out that, oh, actually we have an easy fix for this. That rollover should have been marked as a rollover.
Yeah,
So
That's great.
and one more, I found a few students who they put the value of the home that they live in as investments, thinking that they were supposed to. And that makes a huge difference as well. So yeah, there are mistakes that.
Right, right. And I know none of you require the CSS profile, but I'll also just add for those families who have had to fill out the CSS profile, that obviously, as you know, you've gone through it, it asks a lot more questions. And the schools that are requiring it, they're getting a lot more data than just the FAFSA. So, and there's ability to put a note in there when you're filling it out. So that might provide the school a little bit more detail. We do have a lot of questions in there, but I have a couple two others that I want to get to before we go into the questions. So Rob, I'll just start with you.
Mhm.
Or actually, Sue, I think I was going to go to you first about the documentation. What type of documentation do you typically require, in most appeals that families can expect to have need available?
A big percentage of the appeals are just a later version of the tax returns is all we need.
Okay.
So we're substituting 24 for 23 or something. If it's mid-year, and we don't have all that information, then we're going to be looking for things like final pay stub, what they're receiving for other income, unemployment, what their projected income is expected to be. Do they think they're going to find a job? Why not? If it's one-time income, that's easy, just documentation of whatever that one-time income was, or any additional expenses. Like medical expenses is tough. We have a lot of people who send us appeals saying they had high medical expenses, and just showing us a bill is not enough because most of that is usually covered by insurance. So we actually need documentation of what has been paid. The easiest way to document that is if you itemize it on your tax returns, then we will look at that figure right there. Otherwise, we usually get a stack of these are my medical expenses, and it's, so it's difficult to go through to determine what was actually paid and what was billed. So basically as we said with everything, it depends. It depends on what they're appealing, but we want documentation to back up whatever it is that they're appealing. And usually often it's just taxes, but we're always going to need a set of taxes in 99.9% of cases. Even if it's something else, we're still going to need the original set of taxes.
Right, that's great. And Rob, I'll toss this one to you. So they've submitted their appeal, they've submitted the documentation. There might be other business statements, things like that you guys might need. So what should they expect afterwards, and how do they make up the difference? Whether or not an appeal is granted, they might still have a balance. How do family, like what's next?
Yeah, sure. So, and once again, this can differ from school to school. We have a rather quick process for appeals. So, appeals that come in are pretty much responded to within the week. So either we're reaching back out to a family saying, hey, we got your appeal. However, we need this documentation. As Sue said, we might need a copy of a tax return. We have a couple of special circumstances forms. One is based on 2025, one is based on 2026. Obviously, right now, families are putting together their 25 taxes. So if something changed in 25, we'd get that information. 26 is more of just, hey, project out what you think that's going to look like based on, what the situation is at hand. But we're going to respond pretty quick once we have that information. We have a committee that looks at kind of the soft appeals weekly, so that gets a response back within a week. And the appeals based on special circumstances, once we have that information, really we turn it around pretty quick. Because we know, once again, as I said, for some families, this is going to determine, can I go here or can I not go here? What is the bottom line going to be? So once they get that information, we send out a revised award letter. A lot of times, we'll also maybe send an email to the parent or the student letting them know the outcome of that appeal, but they'll definitely get a revised award letter which will include a message that is based on the appeal, and then it'll obviously reflect what that increase was, whatever that additional aid was.
Yep.
Then at that point, on our award letter, the families turn it over. We kind of break down kind of what the bottom line is going to be. So they have a pretty good idea of what that new bottom line is.
Mhm.
And at that point, usually a lot of families will engage us to say, okay, I went through the aid process. I've now gone through the appeal process. Thank you, Curry. You gave us some more money. That's great. I know what the bottom line is going to be. Now, where do I go? And that's usually when we start to get into the financing conversation. And then we start to talk to families a lot about payment plans, private loans, plus loans, other financing vehicles to help fill that gap. And those are specific conversations. In sessions, general sessions that we do, we just talk in generalities, obviously. But when a family comes in and we're meeting one-on-one, we're speaking specifically to their situation. I can meet with 5 families and have 5 different ways to finance an education, because 5 families are going to have different financial resources. They're going to have a different comfort level of what they want to do. And so there's no right or wrong. We try to get families to maximize what they can do on an interest-free payment plan, because the more that they can do pay directly to the college, if they have the ability to do that, then that will take away from loans. But obviously, if a family has gone through a change of circumstances, that might not be an option. And then we kind of talk about loans. So there's lots, just so everybody knows that once you get into how do I pay the balance, and I know that's not the topic of today, but there's lots of different ways to do it. There's lots of ways to slice the pie. And I think a lot of families, when either myself or other staff here meet with families, they leave feeling a lot better, knowing, oh, I never realized that these were available. I didn't know that. I think they envision writing this huge check, and that's not the case. So, once again, engage the school. Every school is going to have a little different way to do things, but at the end of the day, it's going to reflect on what you can afford to do and what you're comfortable with.
Great. Yeah, Maria, anything to add here about, what
Um,
Rob just said?
Yeah, I mean, we have a very similar process where we have a committee that meets for this kind of soft appeals, and usually we tell people they'll get an answer within 2 weeks, because it's just timing of when you submit it and when the meeting happens. So we give ourselves the 2 weeks. Obviously, if it's closer to May 1st, we're going to try to get those out immediately, because we know that you have a deadline you have to meet. But this time of year, we tell people 2 weeks. I will say that prior to the current Endicott, I did work at one of the more highly selective, what would be considered a highly selective schools, and they wouldn't even start looking at appeals until April. So it's going to depend on the school. So it may be if you're applying to one of the more highly selective schools, they may let you submit the appeal, but you're probably not going to have an answer. Or they may even say, yeah, don't even submit it until we're not going to start accepting them until X date. So that's another reason to just ask the school what their process is.
That's a good point. I'm gonna get into we have a lot of Q&A that we might not get to, but there was one about early action, early decisions. Should they hold off on depositing if they did get accepted early? If there's appeals going on or things that they might, want to, I don't know, anybody who wants to take that question. Should they wait and I know we talked about early decision being, you're bound to that school unless there's a financial circumstance. So I think, Maria, do
Right.
you have early decision, I think,
We do have early
you want to
decision.
talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, for sure, if you have a financial situation, you want to talk on to us on ED, because it is meant to be binding unless you have a special financial circumstance.
Mhm.
We do still accept appeals even from ED students, even though they're technically committed. Yeah, I mean, I think you have until the deposit deadline to deposit. Like, nobody's rescinding the offer because you waited until the actual deadline date to deposit. So if you need the time to make a decision, I think we obviously love it when people deposit right away. It's good for us, but there is a deadline for a reason. I think obviously if you're looking to have an extension to that deadline, then you're going to want to talk to somebody immediately. I know we very rarely will extend that deadline. We did when the FAFSA was late, for obvious reasons, but now that the FAFSA is on time again, I think most schools won't extend their deposit deadline. That's probably a generalization, but there may be a valid reason why a school might give somebody a couple of extra days because, they were waiting for an appeal decision or something like that. So again, you'd have to talk to your school about that. But there's nothing wrong with waiting until that deadline if you're not sure, because nobody's going to say, "Oh, we're stopping accepting deposits." You have until that deadline to do it, till
Yeah, that's great.
11:59 p.m. on the day of the deposit day.
On Neighbors, right? Sue, anything to add there?
Well, we don't have ED, we only have EA, and I don't see any difference with EA
Yeah.
really. So it makes no difference for us at
Right.
all. Yeah.
We do. I know we won't be able to get to all the questions, but there's a theme in some of the questions that I just want to toss out there before we, finish the webinar. Um, and we touched upon this earlier, but I just want to make sure. So for folks who maybe they don't claim a couple children that they're taking care of, or they're sending money overseas to their family, things like that, where there's other expenses to take care of family members or, elderly parents, whatever it might be that might not be, claiming on your taxes. How would that work? And whoever wants to go first. We have a few questions along those lines in the chat.
Yeah. I mean, I would say I was about to say it depends again. But I mean, there are situations where like an elderly parent could potentially be part of the family
Mhm.
size in a special circumstance. I mean, I think the way it's defined is if you're providing more than half of that person's support and you can document that you're doing that, then they don't have to be claimed on your taxes because there's lots of reasons why people claim or don't claim people on taxes. The tax rules are different than the
Mhm.
financial aid rules. Also, that's for the taxes are from a prior year and you might be
Yeah,
supporting somebody now. So I would definitely, if you have that kind of situation, I would definitely talk to the financial aid office and explain and just expect that they're going to want some kind of documentation other than just the word that you're doing that if you're able
yeah,
to provide it. I know sometimes that gets hard to provide. um so but then it also goes to my point about where even when there's not things we can do to change the FAFSA because it doesn't fit into a FAFSA reason to change it, we do for schools that do offer institutional aid, especially I would say the schools that have the CSS profile, they- they're usually in a different financial aid category that's known as institutional method, which that's inside baseball, but those schools are looking at other things besides just what's on the FAFSA anyway. So, you know, it may make a difference in the institutional funding, even if it doesn't make a difference it can't be taken into consideration for federal funding. So if you
that's a
have
good
those
point.
situations, I would definitely bring them up and include them in your appeal.
That's a great point. Yeah. Rob, Sue, anything to add on that one, or is it?
I would just I'd echo what Maria said. I think she said it perfectly. Same thing that's exactly how we would look at it too.
Okay, great.
We would, even if we didn't necessarily include that person in the family size, we may look at how much money was sent, if it was sent overseas or something like that. We've had people send us documentation of money that has been sent and the reasons why and stuff, and we've looked at that.
Mhm.
Great, great. Okay, great. Well, we have a few more questions, but it's 1:30, so I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. So I'm going to go through the questions afterwards, and if there's any that I think we really didn't answer, but we could, we'll email you individually. But want to just let you know that we do have some upcoming webinars that will be helpful in this process. So you can scan these QR codes. We'll send you these slides so you have the QR codes, but coming, I think next week, I'm doing the first one about financial aid offers, understanding them and comparing them and really trying to figure out what do you owe and making a plan to pay whatever that balance due is before that May 1st deadline. That is a great webinar. And we have some great tools for that at MEFA. I'll also be probably doing the first comparing college loan options webinar. We have great loans here at MEFA, so we'll talk about that, how it compares to other private loans, the plus loan, things like that. Here are our social media channels, so please follow us, like us, friend us. If you like a podcast, we have a great podcast, so sign up for that one. And then we're also here Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, for phone calls, emails. And if you go on MEFA.org, where it says contact us, it's kind of near the bottom of the homepage. There's also a link where you can schedule a one-on-one appointment. So we have that availability as well. So we have a lot of counselors like myself at MEFA who talking to families and can help you through this process. So with that, I'm going to stop the webinar. I'll email everybody a link to the recording as well as these slides. But before ending, I do want to thank Maria and Rob and Sue. This was really helpful. We had some good questions. And thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your guidance and expertise.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody. Have a great day. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.